Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of video 1 for chapter 8. Just to reiterate too something that I mentioned and I'm going to mention in the upcoming announcement. Schedule for chapter 8 and the next chapter is going to be a little disjointed because we have a guest speaker coming in. Originally scheduled for today, Monday, but is going to be speaking on Wednesday instead. And that's Ashley Burt. He's the CEO of Gunnison State Bank, and he's been CEO and president of that bank for almost a quarter century. I think actually CEO for 25 years and president for 17, something like that. But he's also worked for the Denver branch of the Kansas City Federal Reserve District. So that's a very high profile position, and he's been both a bank regulator. They're the people that oversee banks to make sure they kind of stick into the rule book. And he's also been at sort of the cutting edge in the forefront of cannabis banking. So he's got really a wealth of knowledge. And so if you could do me a huge personal favor, okay, I know what you're thinking. Do we really owe this guy a personal favor? If you could do me one, be here at 8 o'clock because he's starting his lecture then and he's giving his time. Now, the structure that it's going to be basically is the first 30 minutes or so is going to be him, his background, how he got into banking, how he got to where he is, and then he's going to go straight into discussing cannabis and how that industry is getting regulated and how what trends he expects to see in that industry. So it'll be a very beneficial thing to listen to, I think. Because not only is Colorado into it already, it's legal here, right? But other states are going to be getting into it too. So please extend him all the courtesy as you would a guest. Be professional, be on time. And he's very open to questions. He said the first half he plans on talking about community banking and the cannabis industry and cannabis banking. The second half, he's going to open up to questions. So let her rip. I mean, anything. This is a great resource. And the reason I sort of say, please be here at 8 and please be here with questions is I want to use them in the future. Okay. So pay it forward to your brethren. Because I think he's going to be a great resource for other classes as well. But if you're interested in any way, shape, or form in the financial industry or banking or cannabis banking, I mean, you're not going to get a better resource than Mr. Burt. So please take advantage of it. I'll leave it at that. We're going to wrap up the first part of Chapter 8. We're going just the first 10 pages, which leaves us 3 topics to cover. One, the book asks about what is a tall organization? And secondly, what is a flat organization? And last but not least, what is a matrix organization? Okay, tall organizations are what you get when company A, let's call it Hershey's, for example, a candy bar manufacturer, decides to buy a sugar company. Great idea, right? I mean, because they use a lot of sugar. And instead of letting the sugar company profit, why not have the profit go into the Hershey company, right? So, let's say that acquisition takes place and those 2 companies become one. Typically, they want to get the benefits immediately. So, you know how I mentioned before that when companies merge, often they'll leave things be for a little while. They don't want to rock the boat too much because they don't want the good people getting scared off and leaving. And same applies here. So what happens is it's almost as if you could visualize it, that Hershey is taking that sugar company and placing it on top of Hershey, i.e. they're leaving all the groups and all the divisions and all the functions alone, albeit they're duplicate, okay? So you've got duplicate HR, you've got duplicate payroll, you've got duplicate shipping, those type of things. And that's you're wasting a little bit of money there. But if you're the CEO of Hershey, you say to yourself, well, okay, yeah, some money's bleeding out here, but that being said, we want this to run smoothly, and the quickest way for us to get the benefits of this merger is to just leave things be for a few months, and as I say, maybe a year, for example, in my cases. And so they'll do exactly that. They'll just stack that company on top of the parent company. And if they acquire somebody else, another sugar manufacturer or a packaging company, for example, to wrap the candy bars with, then they would put it on top of the organization as well. So now instead of 2, now you got 3 payroll departments and 3 purchasing departments and 3 sales and marketing departments. So a lot to manage, but again, you get rapid time to benefit, for lack of a better way to describe it. You do have time to sort it out, and in the meantime, you're saving money, so that's all good, right? The problem with tall organizations clearly is that communication flows slowly. So if the parent, now all of a sudden, company A, the acquirer, in this case Hershey, is dealing with company B, the sugar company, and dealing with company C, the wrapping company, and the packaging company. Paperwork's got to flow down to Hershey, okay? Because Hershey ultimately is going to foot the bill for whatever company A is spending and company B and company C are spending. So all the bills come down to Hershey, and they may ask for justification, they may not, but the fact is that communication goes slowly through tall organizations because they've got to go through multiple layers of bureaucracy and multiple people and multiple approvals. Whereas if they were fully integrated, again, a year from now, let's assume they are fully integrated, you wouldn't have to deal with that. Things would move much faster. So tall organizations tend to bring you rapid time to benefit. But the downside is communication is very bad. Things can get lost in translation, and you do bleed away a little bit of money and time and energy and effort with a tall organization. They're rare these days, okay? You don't see many tall organizations. There's going to be questions on the quiz and the final. A tall organization versus a flat organization. So if you understand the fundamental difference, that ought to be good enough, okay? If there's any confusion about it, please come and ask me, let me know. A flat organization is basically synonymous with a term used in the book that will show up on the quiz, probably the final two, called span of control. The span of control is how many people can a manager manage, okay? And typically the tasks are similar. So imagine, if you will, an assembly line where the same thing is getting stamped out on the assembly line, one right after the other. Okay, well, nothing's changing from one end of the assembly line to the other end of the assembly line. So realistically, one person has a broad span of control, which is the beauty of a flat organization. You've got the people on the factory floor producing goods and services, and you don't need a whole lot of management to oversee it. So there's an advantage to that. So organizational structures tend to be very lean. You're wasting minimal resources on management with a flat organization. And they tend to apply to companies that have production that allows for a broad span of control, meaning you really just need one person to oversee a big chunk of the organization's production. So again, that's just, be familiar with that aspect of it. That brings us to the third category, which is matrix organizations. And for that, say hello to my little friend. This is for matrix organizations. Okay, that's corporate headquarters on top. And I'm not going to hold this the whole time, but you can see, like, on the left side, it's the hardware division. On the right side, the software division. And then there's different tasks. There's development and manufacturing with hardware, development and coding with software, debugging and testing with software, of course. And the software has to work on the hardware. Now, these are called matrix organizations because the software division and the hardware division pretty much run autonomously. They have their own research and development groups. They have their own product. Again, coding is done totally separate than manufacturing a computer. So those are two different production tracks, so to speak. Now, where it becomes a matrix, not the movie Matrix, but where the matrix aspect of it comes in is clearly the software has to work on the hardware, doesn't it? You can't just send out a hardware system. I mean, it's just a big metal box with some chips in it if the software doesn't run properly on it. I've learned that the hard way a few times. Now we're short on time, but there's some, when we have a few minutes extra to kill, I've got some stories of misery to tell about what happens when the software doesn't work on the hardware. But so what happens is you have these two separate silos of company, the software silo and the hardware silo. But at some point they need to interact with each other, don't they? I mean, they do. You have to go, the software developers have to go over to the hardware people and say, okay, here's where we're at with the software. Could you please run it on the system and see how it's running, what the performance is, and that type of thing. And if it's running great, fine. They may try to, strip the coding down a little bit. Or they may need to adapt the hardware. I mean, they may need to, okay, we need a faster processor chip. We need more gigabytes. We need, more RAM, more storage, all the things on the hardware side. So it's a very iterative and interrelated process between getting the hardware and the software to match up. And nobody knows this better than gamers, right? I mean, Microsoft is a big gaming platform, but I could tell you that Microsoft is working very, very closely with the game developers to make sure that the speed is optimized. I mean, for those of you who are gamers, you probably know this, right? That you're looking for a software product that's going to run very, very quickly on the hardware platform. If it's slow, you're going to move on to something else pretty quickly, aren't you? So there's got to be a lot of communication between those two silos, one being hardware, one being software. But they've got to sort of get married at the bottom of the development, or through the development process. They have to communicate, and they have to work together very carefully, closely and carefully. So that's what a matrix organization is, two very distinct functions, but there's a lot of interaction between the two to make sure they work as a finished product. Again, any questions, let me know. And now we have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to tell you a bedtime story if you're not asleep already. Here's the problem with some of these organizational structures. I'm just going to read it verbatim because it's this is about two companies that merged, actually multiple companies that merged, because 6 months earlier, company A had acquired another company. Now they're acquiring company B, and so on and so forth. So it says a lot of middle managers and line people were fired, and the CEO of the original companies, and the character here is a guy by the name of Louis, who was Louis's boss, was moved upstairs. Sort of like Queen Elizabeth, says Louis. But who's running the show now? Could it possibly be nobody? The day finally came when Louis decided to quit, and that's what this story is about. He said, I had nobody to quit to. We were a $300 million company with no distinct lines of authority because of all the mergers. He spent several months getting ready for the moment, establishing the groundwork of the future enterprise and tying up all the loose ends in the old one. But he was stymied. To whom should he tender his resignation? He says, at this point, with all the mergers, I didn't know exactly who I was reporting to. He said he worked downtown, but there was nobody superior to him at that location. His paycheck came from Long Island, signed by somebody that had no sway over him. His sales manager was someplace in New Jersey, and Louis had never had anything to do with him. The president and the COO, the chief operating officer, were in that splendid corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, but he never went there. And the CEO, his old CEO, had been stripped of all of his power. And as far as Louis knew, was someplace else entirely. So he wondered if he should even quit at all. He said, why not just quietly leave? He said, he said, they wouldn't have known if I was gone for like 6 months. They probably would have continued to pay me the whole time. Now, you may not get that lucky, but the fact of the matter is that that's what happens when companies merge. Things get lost in all the shuffling, and everyone's kind of looking out for themselves. So they may or may not be looking out for you or people at your strata in the organization. And so Louis probably just left and continued to get paychecks, and somebody finally said, hey, are you still working here? I don't know what Louis finally said, but I thought that was kind of a humorous exclamation point on some of the issues that come with mergers and acquisitions. So anyway, that's it. Takes us to the 16-minute mark. Thank you. We'll see you on Zoom, and any questions, let me know.